Casting with Ceri Jones.
Hi guys, and welcome to this week's podcast. Quite a bizarre thing happened to me earlier this week. I met up with Jason Evans and we fished down at the local estuary in search for bass. Now, Jason was the competition winner for April or maybe it was May to win a day's fishing at Paper Mill. Well, the small still waters are struggling now with the heat and the temperatures, so he gave us a shout if I could take him out and fish for bass. So this we did, and he kindly tied some wonderful flies, some real good patterns. Great flighter, I guessed him. So anyway, we started fishing down at the estuary. That's one thing you do learn when you're fishing in a tidal water, is don't put anything down. This is something which Jason came to learn, because he put his net down. And it was a good net too. It was a McLean's net. And during the day then he realised that the net was down at where we started. So anyway, there was not much chance because the tide came in. We went back and it was gone. So later in the day, Jason left and I decided to wait for low tide just to see if I could see the nets once the tide has gone down. Anyway, I had a good look around, good rummage around, nothing, couldn't find anything. So it was one of those things. So we thought that was it. But as it happened, I was going back down the following day to do some guiding for one of my Patreon members, Nigel Hartley. We tackled up and we walked the banks and I was explaining where we're going to fish and this and the other. And I just happened to tell him what happened to Jason the day before. And just as we got to the spot where I thought this is where we should start to fish, I happened to look down and there in front of me was the net. Who'd have thought it? So I took a photograph, sent it to Jason, and he was actually over the moon, as you can imagine. So that was my find, or my catch for the week anyway. And I want to start by thanking and welcoming my new patrons who joined this week. And I really appreciate the support of the channel. Lots more planned as well for the next couple of weeks. And those who haven't joined yet, please consider becoming a Patreon. We'll get access to over 90 past episodes and weekly podcasts, bonus content, photographs behind the scenes to each episode, and other exclusive content and competitions each month. Before I go on to this week's guest, I just want to say I will be in Ireland now fishing for the Ferox throughout September. Even though I've got some bookings lined up for the Ferox days, I have a few dates available. If anybody wants to join me and experience some outstanding fishing, these amazing specimen fish, give us a shout. So on to this week's episode. This week's guest actually met about 8 years ago while I was working for a trout fisherman. He's based in the southeast of Ireland, near Waterford. But he's not just a trout angler. It's plain to see when you look at his Facebook page. He also has a passion for saltwater fly fishing. And he tells us about his methods and areas where he fishes for the bass and mullet in and around his home, in the estuary and the sea, and around the Copper Coast. He also goes on to tell us stories of how he started fishing when he was a young boy, fishing the river around his town. Plus he tells us of the regular trips he takes to go up west to fish the Corrib. So welcome to my chat with Jason O Riordan. Hello Jason.
Well, how are you?
Not too bad, you well?
Good.
It's been a long time since I spoke to you last, and I was thinking back, I think it must have been 2014, maybe 15.
Yeah, it's been a while, yeah.
Yeah.
You were over in Waterford there.
Yeah.
Time.
And do you know what? I've been over many times since, passed through Waterford, and each time I come over and I think, why don't I get in touch with you to fish it again, you know? Because I normally just head over to the west, get on the ferry, and drive over. And that was such a good day we had in Knockaderry, isn't it?
Yeah, you had a really nice brown trout, I remember, at the end of the day in that bay.
Wait, I had two. I think it's two about £6. But that bay, you took me to that bay and it was like that just happened, one of those things that come together.
Yeah, no, it's a lovely lake.
It is, yeah. Do you still fish it?
Yeah, I fish it in the winter, a little bit in the winter and the early season, because the saltwater fishing around here, you're really talking April before it's going to kick off. Could be May if the weather is cold. So,
Yeah.
it's nice to have something like that you can go down, get into the boat. We use it a kind of practice. I know you love Corrib. My friend Dave and I, we go up fairly regularly, and just to sharpen up, just to go out on that still water there and pull a few flies before you go to the big lakes is good,
Yeah, I do remember it well. It was, for me, it was very similar to fishing Chew Valley Lake. The same methods, techniques, and similar lake because it's very shallow, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty shallow. Actually, some other time when you're over, we'll fish the other lake. But then we've another lake called Carrickaventry. Gets big hatches.
Is it?
You'd love it. It's a bit smaller, but I mean the hatches are. It's one of the few lakes where you'll see trout coming up taking damsels, adult damsels.
Right.
There's a guy. He does a bit of boating on Mask. He's in the club there, and I'm sure I've seen him dapping the damsels with a dapping rod.
Really? Do you know what?
Yeah.
I was talking about this in my last podcast, actually, about hatches, the thing to expect in the summer. And I mentioned about the damsels. And damsel nymphs, yeah, a lot of people have caught. It's like it's probably the biggest part of a trout's diet in the summer. But I've never had a fish, spooned a fish with an adult damsel in it.
You'd actually see them come out of the water and take them in the air in this lake sometimes.
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah, be good to see.
They kind of come back. It's a bit like mayfly. They seem to come back to lay eggs.
Yeah.
And they fall spent on the water. And what you get some years is you have that weed that grows up and it's sort of touching the surface.
Yeah.
And in the afternoon, you'd see all the damsels come back onto it, sort of clumping onto it. And the trout just switch on. They know it's going to happen. They know what time it's going to happen, and they'll be on them. So, no, yeah, and it's good. Just, kind of going into the autumn, good daddy fishing and stuff there too.
And what lake is that again, you said?
It's called Carrickaventry. It's just outside Waterford. It's probably closer to the city than the one you fished.
Is it run by the same club, or is it totally different?
Yeah, same club.
Is it?
Same club, so same access. Another nice, good facility, floating pontoon, boats for members and guests and all that.
That's
same sort of setup as before.
That's one thing I noticed how switched on the club was. I have never seen a club with so much facilities as they had then.
Oh, yeah, toilets and you know what I mean. All the things you go to some fisheries before, and that just a port a cabin with a toilet in it, somewhere to freshen up. And Knockaderry is even a bit more done to it since you were there. They have another cabin there now, and there's a table and chairs and kettles, and lads just go in and fry up the food. And if you're out for a long day, it's nice just somewhere like that to pull in, have the lunch, bit of banter, and go back out fishing.
Yeah. Well, if it's fishing, next month, September, because I'm going over for the month in September, I'll either call up on the way there, over to the west, or on the way back. I'll have to see.
Yeah, no, you'd like to try this lake if it's fishing well. You'd enjoy it because there's good hatches, and dries should be good there in September as well.
Daddies, I guess, is it?
Daddies, yeah, daddies. And there's some nice browns in it, because I know, look, the rainbows are good, and they can be good when sometimes the browns are switched off.
Yeah.
But it's nice to pick up some browns there too,
Yeah. That's one thing I noticed about Knockaderry. We had some really nice rainbows as well. And they weren't your normal stockies. You could see they'd overwintered. They were the big tails bloom on the fins, and it was something special. So there's, because there was so much feed in there, probably, they're going to keep their weight.
Yeah, there's a lot of food, we'll say, on the bottom.
Yeah.
Bit, I suppose, shrimps, hoglouse, nymphs, a lot of that stuff. Not so much, traditionally, not so much surface type. I know you pulled a few with your sneaky hoppers that you have.
Yeah.
But Crixes. There's a lot going on under the surface, whereas this other lake, Carrickaventry, now is real olives. I mean, it's like a hatch of canis when the olives are on. They're just all over you.
Yeah. I remember. It wasn't until you mentioned that now. I remember because we tried a few different areas and we anchored. And when we were pulling the anchor up, you were showing me the amount of food in the weed on the bottom.
Yeah.
So there's no need for them to come up sometimes, I guess.
No, it's funny. I fished Sheelan this year, and the guys were describing, because I'd never fished Sheelan.
Oh, yeah.
And they were describing that, fish won't come up. There's so much food on the bottom. And they were talking about what the fish were feeding on. And I was going, this sounds like Knockaderry.
Yeah.
Early season, fish won't come up, even though you might get a hatch a small buzzer or something, and they just nothing showing on the surface, but you catch a fish and spoon him, he's full like.
Yeah.
So
how did you do?
Sheelan sounded a bit like that.
How did you do in Sheelan?
Useless. To be honest, I'd never been, and it was a sort of somebody pulled out, and I just sat in the boat with a guy, so we didn't get out for long. I saw maybe 2 fish for the day, which again sort of seemed like what I'd heard. I caught a couple of pike
right.
on Mayflies, which I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, there's 1 or 2 anglers I know that fished it. They do fish it quite often, and in the spring, for I think about 2 or 3 weeks, they couldn't go wrong. They're only fishing small buzzers, But like you said, you wouldn't see much on the top. But they were there feeding like a frenzy down below, and they were getting like 6 fish a time, maybe more, and they're all good fish, like 3 pound plus fish.
Yeah, that's what I said to one of the chaps I know fishes it regularly, Kevin Sheridan. He's a fly tyer. He does a lot of fly tying demos, and he fishes it. And I said, Kevin, I think I'd rather go up there early season.
Yeah.
This was meant to be kind of spent mayfly time when I was there, and
right.
I saw probably more spent mayfly than I'd have seen on other lakes. But what I was told is that wasn't a big fall of spent for Sheelan.
Yeah.
So it was a small fall of fly, which, if you're used to Corrib or somewhere, you were saying, God, look at all these mayflies coming off. But it's not for Sheelan. Sheelan, from what the guys tell me, when you get a big fall, it's, clouds of fly lights coming back.
That's one thing I've never really experienced a great hatch of spent in the west on Corrib or any of the waters over there. It's not really known for spent, whereas the Midland waters are. And I fished Ernell for the first time this year, and we just fished literally spur of the moment, and we went out for a couple of hours, and we moved a couple, but no, nothing. We just it wasn't the best day, to be honest, but I like to spend more time in the Midland waters, though. Yeah,
definitely the spent now. I was surprised that it's not that big a lake, Sheelan, and there was a lot of boats on it at the time. One of the chaps I met, he had a fish the evening before on a murrock, so he waited until the spent was over, and then he pulled some sort of a dry sedge anyway, into the dark. And again, he said it was about a 20-minute window, but he got a fish.
Wow.
But yeah, no, look, it's an intriguing. It's a kind of have this thing. If I go to a lake and if I blank, I'm just planning now for next year for that lake.
Yeah.
Just if I get one of the good fish off it, I probably wouldn't be going back there all the time. But I just like to catch one of these Sheelan trout now that I've kind of been up there for a look around. So we're planning an early season trip next year for maybe a bit of buzzer fishing, I think.
I might see you there then, maybe. So tell me, how did it actually start for you? Because I noticed really you're into your rivers and your bass especially, but we'll come on to bass in a minute. But how did it all start for you with the fishing?
That's just funny. It actually started with sea trout.
Oh, yeah?
There's a small river in the town here called the Colligan. It used to be, back in the day, I suppose before my time, it was a really prolific sea trout river. A lot of guys from Wales used to fish it.
Right.
Every summer we used to meet guys who'd come across from Wales to fish it. There was some good size sea trout taken from it,
Yeah.
Nighttime fishing. So my brothers fished, my dad fished, he tied flies. He was a pretty good fly dresser. And it's funny, actually, I remember I learned to fly cast at night. So when I started fishing for brown trout in the day, because there's no real brown trout in that river, it was small things. It was all mad because I could actually see where the trees were, you know. So what we used to do is you'd pull off an amount of line and you'd cast across some piece of fast water near where you were going to fish. And you basically counted the amount of retrieves. So it was, 10 or 12 or whatever. And then when you went fishing, you pulled off the same amount of line and you knew then that you were casting across the far bank, because on a really dark night you can't see. And I mean, it was probably the same. I expect you've done some sea trout fishing where you're from. They were pretty strict, I mean, about torches, all sorts of stuff. And we used to have some great fun. In my father's time, he told me guys used to walk from the local factory at lunch hour, put their rod against a tree where they were going to fish, go back to work, and they'd arrive back maybe 9:30, 10 o'clock that night, rod still standing against the tree. That was their spot.
Really? Making them mark?
Imagine doing that now. Your rod wouldn't last long on a river, I'd say.
It wouldn't.
Yeah, that's what they used to do back. And certain anglers had certain pools, he said, and you daren't go into a guy's pool. Like, he'd pretty much chase you off and say, hey, you can't fish here.
It's like the Germans with the deck chairs.
The old timers had their pools, and they were able to rest the pools, and nobody was to fish it before they came. And obviously, my time, it wasn't quite like that, but lads would arrive out maybe an hour before dark, and they'd sit under a tree, and that's where they were fishing, and you had to go to the next spot if you'd like. And you could go and fish the fast water. I remember one night I got in because I was fairly young. They used to let me walk from home. I'd walk out, fished, and once I was back about 12:30, 1 o'clock, I was okay.
Yeah.
So was a particular night, it wasn't that dark, and there was an old timer that'd been fishing the river a long time, and he said, "You're too early, young man." So I went up into some fast streamy water, and I had a fly. It was some sort of an American streamer pattern I'd seen in a book. I don't know, is it called a hornberg or something? It had like a teal wing with yellow stripes down the side and a hackle in the front. It was an unusual looking thing at the time. I went up and I was pulling this thing. Basically, it was like a streamer across the current, and the fish were just hammering it. Every cast, I was hitting a fish. So I had about 10 or 12 fish. I knew this fella comes around the corner, and he said, "What are you getting them on?" And I said, "I call it the too early fly." And I walked off. But he just, that was it. I mean, sort of modern things, even surface flies really weren't, it was just wet flies at the time when we started off. And look, they caught loads of fish. But the river would be full of fish. I mean, you'd look into any pool. And it's funny, you guys, you have a name on the small sea trout in Wales, don't you?
Oh, the schoolfish.
Schoolies, yeah. See, schoolies with us generally means bass where I live on the coast. So they used to call on our river. I don't know if it's a thing in the southeast. I've never heard of another, but on our river they would say that there's a big school of blueheads.
Oh, blueheads
in the river.
Yeah.
And when you'd look at the schoolies in the water, they would have a bluish tinge to them.
Yeah.
So, they distinguish between a sort of a good-sized sea trout. We'd say sea trout rather than suan. And then the schoolies were all called blueheads. So a guy say, "Oh, I saw 50 or 60 blueheads in such a pool," or that, But,
right.
I mean, God, every night, you go and you catch fish. Every night, it didn't matter. And there'd be maybe 10, 15 guys along the lower river, especially, all out with their fly rods fishing. And you get the odd fella used to have maggots with the floats with the lights on them. And they would catch any amount of the schoolie size ones.
Really?
But they tended to lose bigger fish because they were fishing like 2.5 pounds.
Yeah.
Tip it to the hooks. I remember one time a guy from Wales down on the tidal pool. I walked down. I was looking, because I was going to fish that night, and he had a keep net. I'd never seen a keep net because there was no coarse fishing here.
No.
And I saw this thing, and I was kind of looking at him, and I was saying, he's got a net in the river. Like, what's he doing here? And I said, well, a bit brazen, because I could tell his accent. He was actually Welsh. And I said, what's the story here? And he pulled in the keep net. Man, he's schooly sea trout inside it. He must have had 50 or 60 of them. Like,
what was the point of keeping him in the net, though?
I think he was more of a coarse angler.
All right.
So he kept them all, and then he spilled them all out at the end. He just caught them, put them in it, and spilled them back in.
So I thought perhaps he was going to keep the bigger ones or something, but
no. I think he wanted to weigh it at the end. You know what I mean? What weight of them? He'd probably take a photo or something as well.
You'll do well to fill the net these days.
Look, I like all these small sea trout rivers that suffered a lot from poaching. I generally only fish it now after rain. You know, when you have a bit of a spade coming down it.
Yeah.
It's catch and release, single hook only, which is it's not any harm. But I mean, the lad with his fly rod or spinning, he's not really doing a whole lot of damage compared to the poachers. You know, I remember one night. It was some fun. This lad, he was saying he was catching a load of really big fish.
Yeah.
And back then, I mean, they started when I was young. I remember most lads had carbon rods were only just coming out. A lot of lads still had fiberglass rods, and it was funny. He was telling everyone in the pub and all, he was catching all these fish, but nobody could see him on the river. So he arrived one night anyway, and my father was cheeky enough. So he went up to him and he said, show us how you're catching them. So he said, show us. So your man went to tackle up, and he actually couldn't fly fish it really at all. And what happened to him is the line he had for the rod was so heavy, it was a salmon line. It wouldn't go through the rings. The whole place was standing watching him after all these stories he'd be telling everyone in the pubs. And he couldn't put the line up through the rings of the fly rod.
Jeez, that must have been some thickness of line.
Oh,
the small little
I'd
rod.
say he wasn't seen for about 6 months, I'd say, after this guy. You imagine the embarrassment of it, you know?
Yeah.
But I just used to be all sorts of banter and messing going on, and you know.
There's more and more people fishing for sea trout in the day now, I noticed. You know, because when you think about it, you know, like Karan, the sea trouts feed in the day, or not supposed to feed, they take your flies at least in the day. So I think, you know, I wouldn't say it's a myth that you only catch them at night. You obviously do catch them at night. But I think more and more people now are coming to the idea you don't have to wait till the night to catch these sea trout now.
No, I mean, the Blackwater, which is kind of famous for salmon in our parts, the Munster Blackwater. I fished it a few years ago, evening fishing with dries. And I wouldn't generally night fish on the Blackwater for sea trout at all. I'd only fish the evening rise. It would be nearly all dry fly I would do. And I know some of the guys that are big into the Euro nymphing and that sort of stuff here,
yeah,
they pick them off with the nymphs quite regularly.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they're popular now, aren't they?
It's a bigger river. You know, in a really small little spate river, I've seen guys trying to nymph them, and I think the problem is the fish are a bit too spooky in the day, you know. But on those slightly bigger rivers, there's no problem. It's just like fishing for any other trout.
Yeah.
So certainly the dries and that. And my thing with the daytime fishing in we'd say floods, you'd probably say spades. I lost a lot of big fish at night in a small river. There's branches hanging in, there's snags everywhere. I lose a lot less fish fishing streamers in a flood. Yeah, I think the angler has the advantage there when the water's coloured and the fish, you know, he's fresh in, he's not used to the pool, and you know the pool, and you've daylight. You can follow a fish, you know what I mean? You can see everything. So I would say my percentage of larger fish landed is higher fishing during the day than it is at night, actually.
Right. And what is your biggest sea trout?
Well, on our river, I think if you're getting anything kind of 3.5 pounds up,
Nice.
That's a good fish.
Yeah.
We normally would get a run of fish sometime around late May. Might be the earliest of them. They tend to be bigger fish.
Yeah, same here.
And then you get these sort of smaller fish come in August, September. It's probably typical enough.
Yeah.
And you get the odd big fish. But I mean, I think the biggest fish I've had out of it was around 7 pounds.
Nice.
Sea trout. And, I know when I was younger, I used to see lads pulling bigger fish. And I was walking the bank one time and I was heading home and I spotted one of the local poachers. He was going walking in the road. I was only in my early teens and I presumed he had a salmon in his hand. Because after snatching this fish out of the river, it looked to be 20 pounds to me as a kid,
Jeez.
But I heard afterwards that the fish was around 16, 17 pounds and it was a sea trout.
Wow.
And I said it to one of the fisheries guys some years after. I said, they told me that fish was a sea trout. And he said, when he was working and he used to check the salmon nets on the local headland here, which is Helvig Head, with a fishing area for trawlers. He said every year there would be some big double figure sea trout caught in the salmon nets there. At the time when, they were allowed to net salmon out at sea, he said every single year in the boxes there'd be some big double figure sea trout. So it just goes to show they were there,
Have you got water there now? Because we haven't got hardly any water here at the moment, so nothing.
No, we've no water. I was walking the dog. I have a couple of spaniels here, and I was walking the pup, trying to train him badly, and he could walk across. He could cross with wellies. I think up the west they've had a bit of rain. Down here it's stayed pretty much dry.
Maybe it'll be a good September.
Look, it doesn't. The good thing about being based where I am is there's something else to fish for.
Yeah. This is what I'm going to come to, actually, because looking at your Facebook page, am I right in saying the bass is your main passion, or is it just like you just got lots of bass pictures on there?
No, I don't mind what I fish for. I'm funny that way. And people always ask me, when I'm guiding and that, they'd say, what's your favourite fish to catch? I don't care. I mean, I'm as happy up on Corrib in the early season, drifting along, as I am in the height of summer fishing for bass or up in the Blackwater or shore for salmon. I think, what I like is to have a good chance. I don't care about not catching fish, but I'd love to have a chance of a fish. Yeah. So I think, look, we could put it down to global warming, Ceri, or whatever, but the summers are getting drier. You said it there, they're getting drier and drier.
Oh, they are.
If you went back maybe over 10 years ago, I would have been salmon fishing all summer. Loved it.
Yeah.
Big into it. They put a lot of time into the casting, all that side of it. And then, you come along and the river's down its bones. And you're there with your fly, and you might get an hour before dark or something, So, look, I'll fish the reservoirs. This is going to sound now like a guy who fishes 365 days a year, probably, but I fish the reservoirs through the winter into the spring. I'll do a couple of trips up the Corrib and Mask. I usually go up and fish with Tom Dock if he's available, or if not, we fish ourselves. And then, you're into a bit of early season bass around sort of late May. So early May, you get a bit of salmon. You get good conditions for salmon. Late April, early May, you get that run of springers.
Yeah.
And then you're into bass. And then the busy month for me really is September. If you get rain, as you said, the lakes will fish well. There'll be salmon running. It's a good month for bass.
Yeah.
But June, July, August, the weather we've been getting the last few years, bass fishing is what, it's the thing to do,
I've always thought that the season anyway is short. As soon as you started the season, like March, April, before you know it, it's September. So if you just put your rods away for like July, August for the trout, it's going to be even shorter. So the last 3 years, I've gone into this bass fishing, and it is addictive. You know, I fished like an estuary to one of the rivers here, and it hasn't been great this year so far, but I will still go and do it. But if you didn't do that, you know, the trout fishing does almost switch off. You know, there are areas and days where you get certain hatches where they come off, but you know, when there's heat, this is more suited for the beach, and at least you get a suntan as well when you fish with a bass.
Yeah, look, a lot of lads don't want to, you know, to go through phases where they don't want to head up to the river at 9:30, 10 o'clock and be there until 12. You know, they have small kids, you know, and different things and families. And, you know, it's the same with the night fishing for sea trout. You know, you go through a period where you just can't put that time in for a lot of people. And you can fish during the day. And on your weekends when you're off work, you can fish in the middle of the day. So, you know, there's not much else to fish for. I mean, I've seen some of the local still waters have to close for a week due to the high temperatures, even this year again. So, you know, there's really limited options. And yet these bass and mullet, I mean, geez, in our estuary here, these golden grey mullet, I mean, there must be thousands of them. They're everywhere. Like.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're surrounded with these things.
Are they the ones? Are they the ones now with the yellow cheek spot on their cheek?
Yeah. Like last few years, there've been gilt-head bream caught down. That's a new thing. That's the warmer water. Like there's species being caught now that traditionally weren't being caught. Like you know, I had smelt on the fly. Again, that was a new thing for me. About a year or two ago, I caught a couple of smelt on the fly when I was targeting the mullet. I've had golden grey mullet, bass, garfish, flatfish. Yeah. You know, you go up the river, you're fishing for either trout. You know, that's kind of, you know, you go out there, there's so many different things you can catch, you know, especially with the fly as well, because you can catch all different sizes of fish.
Yeah. Do you fish for these in the sea itself, or there's a tidal stretch like an estuary, or?
With both. We've that little river I said to you, and there's a smaller one, again, it's very short, called the Bricky River. They run into the harbour here in Dungarvan.
Oh, yeah.
And bass will run right up the river. So the last 2 weeks, the lads have been catching them practically in the town with the lures. Yeah. Just on the bridge and the main road, I've seen the lads fishing under there the last 2 weeks. Every day they've been fishing, but then you can go sort of out of that bay, if you like, along the coast, what we call the Copper Coast. It's got a great name. Copper Coast towards Waterford, or you can head towards Cork. All good bass ground, you know, Waterford, Cork, Ceri, all good bass. Wexford, all good bass fishing ground down here.
Yeah. Have you met James Barry on your travels?
Yeah. I wouldn't meet him fishing that often, funny enough, but I know James. I've met him a few times.
He was telling me stories about the Copper Coast and, you know, the fishing that can be had there. Yeah,
he would fish a lot of Tramore towards me, and then I'd be fishing, say, Dungarvan towards Tramore.
All right.
Now, look, you could meet the lads anywhere. You know, I know he fishes around the place and he travels around the place too. But look, for me, if I'm getting fish in Dungarvan, there's no point travelling to Tramore.
Quite.
You know, it's a bit like, you know, you go out on Corrib or Mask. You know, what's the point in driving past a load of fish in certain bays just to go to another bay?
Yeah.
Fish the ones in front of you first, and if they're not taken, then move. Like.
Would you be fishing the fly then?
Yeah, it's funny. I started off. Obviously, you were saying where did it start, and obviously it was the sea trout, and then onto the stock lakes, because there wasn't much in my area for brown trout, and then at the Blackwater and the shore we had salmon. Got a car, you know. I was in college. I was able to travel a bit, an odd trip up west, and then, you know, a friend of mine had a boat, and he'd been bass fishing all his life with lures, spinning lures. And most weekends he'd say to me, "Do you want to come out in the boat if the weather was good?" I learned a lot from that guy about, you know, where bass are and just the sort of seemed like stupid places to me to throw a lure into such shallow water from a boat. And God, these bass would be hunting right on the edge, particularly when you're in a boat. There's nothing on the shore that would push them out.
Yeah.
Been a good few years fishing with that lad Michael. Very, very good bass lure angler, and also a very good boatman. That's important. That from the lakes. Just to line the boat up in certain coves along the Copper Coast, he's really good at that. You know what I mean? In choppy, bad weather, a lot of the time he was, rough water. He was good at that. He still is. But I learned a lot from him, and obviously that was weekends, and then I was off during the week. He was working, so I used to go fishing from the shore. And the last probably 3-4 years in particular, the amount of fly anglers that want to go saltwater fishing has just exploded.
Have you got any gear as such which you always use? Do you use like a 10-foot for a 9 or something like that?
I always bring 2 outfits. I've always 2 outfits because really you're not sure what you're going to come across. I'd always have a 9-foot for either a 5 or a 6. And that doubles up for mullet and schoolies. And I use that length for guiding as well. 5 and 6 was a lot for guiding. I mean, this year alone, I had a chap from Florida. He had 2 good fish over 60 centimeters. One of the other lads, Christoph, he had a fish over 60 centimeters. So, you'll get fish 6.5 pounds. You'll manage them on a 5 or 6 weight.
What are these, mullets or bass then?
Bass.
Is it? So
yeah.
You know what about getting a distance? You're fishing in amongst rocks, I guess. Then, yeah.
No. When you're over in September, I try and get you down to show you what the harbour is like here in the Outer Bay.
Yeah.
Basically, if you think of a bowl shape,
yeah,
and across the middle of it, you put a sand spit almost the whole distance across, and you're just left with the narrow river channel then. So there's 1.5 miles of a sand spit in Dungarvan Bay, and that is pure sand, like a beach, shallow. So it's a bit like bonefish. You can
flats.
walk along. Yeah, flats with gullies, knee deep to waist deep.
Nice.
Gin clear water, and you can see the fish.
Really?
Oh yeah, I mean the mullet, you can walk out and they'll be just circling you.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I brought Ken Whelan. Ken, pretty well known.
Yeah, I know the name. I don't think I've ever met him. I don't think.
He came in and he said to me, he said, "You realise," he said, that there was a mile long by 500 yards wide of fish.
Wow.
It was flat calm, big spring tide, hot weather. Water was gin clear for wading, and everywhere you looked there was fish breaking, swirling, splashing, all different species. There wasn't a mile long of bass now, but there was like from pretty much most of the length of the sand spit for a reasonable distance out that you'd look was fish.
Yeah.
Like I'd often video the fish there, but I wouldn't put it up on Facebook. I'd share it amongst friends and that.
Would that stretch of water then be tidal?
Yeah, so it's completely dry up until probably the last 2 hours before high, and then it starts to fill the gullies.
Yeah. So
if you're standing on the spit at low water, all you'd see is sand for quite a distance, and there's oyster farms out there then closer to the edge of the tide at low water. Of course, that's great food and ground for bass to come in over. They love oyster trestles.
Do you find there's a difference in your success rate if you fish at night or on the day for bass?
With lures, I would, but with flies, not so much, because a lot of the locations, the lure lads are fishing at night, calm nights on open beaches. Sort of places where you see all the tourists hanging out during the day. Although they catch the bass quite close to their feet, the takes are quite close in.
Right.
What I've noticed is that I don't think I'm reaching them with the fly.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not getting the distance with a fly rod. I mean, they're throwing these hard lures. Let's say they're throwing them 100 yards. So I think the bass are following them in and taking them.
Yeah.
But I've tried it a few times with various lines and flies and things. Now, your standard sort of channels and currents and places that you'd get fish during the day, they'll produce at night as well, with the fly. But the open beaches, I haven't had great success compared to what the lure lads would be catching.
Yeah.
So that to me is either, look, maybe I haven't cracked it yet, but I put a good bit of time in. So I think it's just a distance. You know, I reckon if you'd a spinning rod and a bombarda and you were casting it out with a fly on the back, you would catch the fish.
Yeah. I found that myself. There's one or two really lovely beaches here. And I've done that technique, you know, where you wade in the beach in the evening time, up to your knees, see. And then, but you're casting behind, still in the shore, you know. And then I'm having bass sort of in 2 or 3 inches of water sometimes. Nothing big, you know, pound, maybe a bit more. But you have lots of them, and then I think, right, the bigger ones are further out. So you're trying to cast and fish further out. But I don't know. I don't know if it's because I'm not reaching them as well. The bigger fish are probably keeping the distance.
Yeah, I think so. And they'll come closer at night, but that's closer for a spinning outfit, not necessarily closer for a fly outfit, you know?
Yeah.
But certainly, like the main harbour estuary marks, you know, you can fish them at night with the fly in. But they're good in the day as well.
Yeah.
You know, and you have a current, you have a flow of water and movement, the food's moving around, and that's really good, you know?
Yeah.
But no, sort of these kind of open coast beaches, I wouldn't really put much time into night fishing them at the moment anyway, because I've given it a good try and it didn't seem to be very productive.
Are most of your fish coming to like bait fish patterns, like streamers or closers, or have you tried this? There's quite a few people now I notice on social media, 1 or 2 friends of mine, they're fishing just shrimp patterns, you know?
Yeah, well, that's I suppose going back to what I was saying about having 2 outfits. Your lighter outfit's going to be your shrimp patterns, very small bait fish, mullet type flies, could be dowelbacks, could be apps worms, and then your heavier outfit, which for me is a 9-foot 9 weight, that has 2 purposes. Either it's windy, or you're out on really rough, rocky ground, or you want to chuck some sort of a surface fly, you know, with a lot of foam or deer hair on it, that your 5-foot's just not going to, you know, it's going to struggle to cast it.
Yeah.
So like last week now, I'd fish on surface flies, crease flies. I think I went myself on the Friday evening. I'd eight bass, one nice bass, and the rest were small, all on a sort of a popper type fly. And you know, I was using the 9 weight for that.
Right.
I wasn't worried about it. I mean, this thing lands and you're ripping it and you're making a big commotion, so you're not worried about it. But you know, that was over shallow, sandy, clear ground.
Yeah.
But normally, traditionally, I would be fishing that same location with smaller flies, lighter tackle. You know, it's really clear, it's shallow. A bit of stealth doesn't go astray. But you see, you know, like Colin McLeod, you've probably seen him on Facebook, very famous mullet fly fisherman. There's a book on it. Look at the bass he picks up when he's mullet fishing.
Yeah.
You know, there's another guy, very good fly tire. I think he's around near Wales, Darren Jackson, you'd see. Again, you know, he picks up good bass. Sometimes he's at mullet as well. So, you know, I think it's horses for courses. It's location and method. So, you know, I think if you just bring one outfit, it's not going to cover everything. So it's like having a dry fly and a wet fly outfit in the boat, you know?
Yeah. It's something which when I go to the river or the estuary, I'll go maybe twice a week. Well, depending on the tides, like, and you know, I'm having bass, good bass. Sometimes up to maybe the best last year was about 5.5, something like that. And then, but when I'm fishing, I'm seeing these fish come in, swirling on the surface. You know, hour and a half, 2 hours before the tide. You can see them coming in, and they think, right, here goes. But I guess it's the ones you're seeing on the surface, really, a majority of them are mullet, and by there's bass amongst them. And I'm having these bass, and I'm fishing these streamer patterns. But then you're seeing so many of these mullet. And like last week, I got to say, I saw two which I would put my house on. They were double figures. Because they come up and they just flash on the side. They as they're coming past, you can see they flank. And I'm thinking, Jesus Christ. And I'm thinking to myself, and you see them in the sides then, in inches of water, feeding on, on the fresh, flooded area, come in with the tide, on the shrimps and stuff, So I'm going to hold fire the next couple of trips on the bass, not fish the streamer patterns, and trying to concentrate on the finer stuff, like you said, maybe the apps bloodworm, or little shrimp patterns, or dialbacks, or some, and go finer, Is that something which you do then?
Yeah, and you don't have to go too fine, if you know what I mean. Like, I suppose in the old pound type system, you're looking at sort of 8-10 pounds. You don't have to go down to 3 or 4 pounds. You don't have to go down to like dry fly type tippet or something. They're a bit leader shy compared to a bass, but I mean, you could nearly get away with rope with a bass at times. They're aggressive, like.
Yeah.
But you'd be surprised. I think if you try that, you'll be surprised the bass you're going to pick up. There's an old saying down here. When I was a young lad, I used to ask a lot of people about certain spots, and I'd be saying, "Is it only mullet?" And all the experienced lads back then all said the same thing: bass will swim where mullet swim.
Yeah.
So if you're seeing mullet in swimming, feeding in a place, you can be pretty sure there's bass in there too. But you need to be a bit more delicate about it. That's all. I think if you try that, you in your head you're targeting the mullet, but you might actually get your biggest bass doing that.
Yeah. But what I've noticed is when the fish have more or less passed me in this area where I fish, they come in with the tide and they go up the river then. And then on the way back down, they're a lot slower. When they come in, they just want to move. They dart in past you. You might get the odd one, I find. But when they coming down then, like an hour before the tide has dropped again, I see them in the sides, and there's two specific different type of feeding fish. The ones you can see, they're swirling, they're taking their time swirling in the sides. Now, to me, I guess they're the mullet. But then now and again, you see typical fry feeding action. And there's like lots of fry in the sides, like, you're talking like an inch long. And I take it that they are the bass then. Because do you find mullet don't actually feed on bait fish patterns as such, do they?
They could at times. Again, if it's available, it's the same as in some locations. Not down where I am, but in Ceri, they feed on the maggots, on the rotting weed.
Yeah.
And guys are clever. They pull the lumps of weed down to the low water.
Right.
And as the tide comes in over the weed, the maggots are getting washed out, and all the mullet and probably some bass, they hang around that spot then. It's kind of like a ground baiting technique.
Yeah.
We don't seem to get the maggots in the weed here. I've turned over lots of lumps of smelly weed and that to see. Seems to be a lot more shrimp where I am, and worms. But I think what you're watching for with the bass, like if you think where I am, where like on a good evening, hundreds and hundreds of yards long of fish, and there's different species, how do you pick out the bass out of that?
Yeah, you can't.
And it's a bit like you're saying, the bass, he'll crash in.
Yeah.
When he's feeding, he'll crash in. You'll almost hear it before you see it. And that's the thing. The mullet don't sort of crash around like that. They get active. They get busy.
Grazes, isn't they? Almost.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever seen them on the mud going around in circles. Like maybe 6 or 8 or more of them, all going nose to tail in a circle.
Really?
There's a spot down here. There's 2 spots here near piers where they do it. And I was watching them, because you're high on the pier, and you can see. I'm saying, why do they do that? And I think what it is one guy's disturbing the bed, and the other one coming behind then is able to pick off the food. So they're all working together.
Right.
So you watch them, it's amazing to see. I mean, the circle stays the same size all the time, and they do this, and then they might break off for a few seconds, and they'll come back in, and they make another circle, and they'll go all around again, nose to tail, over the mud, and it almost leaves indents, in the mud when the tide goes out.
Oh, right.
Like little crates, amazing to watch, and they're feeding for sure. So I think there may be, I know it's just a theory that they're sort of disturbing the ground for themselves as well by doing this.
Yeah.
Look.
How has it been for you so far this year?
It's been good. We've been mostly lads that are more interested in the bass. So sort of, you're hedging your bets because the schoolie bass will feed on the same stuff as the mullet. They're in the same areas. That sort of tackle setup suits the location as well. So yeah, we've had a good few mullet lost, and quite a good few bass now. To be fair, we've had really good starts on a mixture of shrimp patterns, small bait fish, and then the last few weeks I'm starting to see more fry.
Yeah.
Around, and they're a nice size, and certainly the poppers are starting to work now as well. And I suppose I haven't done a lot of fishing around low tide, funny enough, which is one of my kind of favourite times to fish. And the area you were describing there as well, I think one of the things to do is to swing your fly. To cast the fly slightly up like you would for salmon almost idea, and just let it swing. Don't retrieve it, or if you are, really, really slowly. I've seen over the years where people are fishing in a sort of an estuary channel with a flow like that, where they're casting and stripping the fly the same as they would out on the open coast. Often the bass are there and they will not take it if you're doing that. Unless you're casting and letting it swing, you won't get them.
Yeah, there's no need to be fast then.
No, I think it's not natural. Everything is just being washed along at a certain speed.
Yeah. And
you're pulling something at 50 miles an hour. Doesn't really... You will get some fish. I remember one time I was guiding some journalists, for magazine articles. And I was sitting on the shore, and I could see these sand eels coming down the channel, and they make these little V, And I was watching them, and all the lads were fishing intermediates with bait fish patterns, deceiver type flat wing patterns, stripping them, and I couldn't understand why they weren't catching, because there was fish being caught there for the few days before, and I'd had a few fish, and I had one of the other rods left on the shore with a full float set up, and I actually put a tube fly on it, plastic tube, full floating line, plastic tube, so short tube with a sort of a long wing, sand eely looking pattern, and the lad said, I'd be saying, look, come on, you have a try. So I walked out. I think 5 casts, I had 5 bass. And I never retrieved. I cast, and as it would swing, a bit like a wake lure for sea trout, would create that same V.
Yeah, so there's a bit of a flow there where you were fishing then.
And there was a flow, yeah, and it was quite a fast flow, and then it was slowing down as the tide dropped. And as the real fast current went out of it, the fish seemed to appear at that time.
Yeah.
And just swinging across, and every time it would come to the surface and create the V, the bass would take it.
I know what you mean. As it's coming round the end of the swing.
Yeah, just before it was straightened out.
Yeah.
And that's and ever since I fished that mark, whether it would be with a tube or a standard fly, I fish it the same way. I cast, leave it swing, and only retrieve when it straightens out. A bit like wet flies, the traditional wet flies in the river.
Yeah.
And on that sort of dangle, when it would straighten out, you'd often get a hit as well.
Yeah.
But if I was there casting and stripping the fly out, it's happened to me too often to be a coincidence,
Yeah.
And even the density of the intermediate lines sometimes, if you're fishing in shallow places, a lot of the intermediate lines I think are sinking too fast.
Yeah. I tend to fish more often than not the floating line. And the reason for that is sometimes the only time I'll fish an intermediate, sometimes if you get really rough weather at sea, when it brings in all the crap and you get a lot of these, the weeds on the surface. And then it's almost every cast, your line's catching it, your fly's catching it. That's the only time I'll use an intermediate then. It's to just try and get underneath it a little bit, you know?
Yeah, even a sinking line if there's waves. If you're out on the coast, you know, on the rock marks, it's that distance between the tip of your rod and the fly where your line's getting all snaky because of the waves. And, you know, if it's getting down through it, you can control it, you know.
Yeah.
It might even mean keeping the tip of the rod right down in the water as well, just to keep that contact, like, you know.
Yeah. Do you ever eat bass?
No, sure. I don't eat hardly any fish.
No, I'm the same.
I'd have an odd client that would want to keep a fish. Most of them don't, to be honest. And I always say to them, if you want to keep a fish between 50 and 60 centimeters. You know, kind of around 55 centimeters. You had a fish around 2.5, 3 pounds, something like that.
Yeah.
And there's no point keeping, A, they're so slow growing anyway. B, it's like anything, you know. I did a similar podcast for someone lately, and I said, you know, it's like eating lamb or ram. You know,
yeah.
Why would so those big old bass that are really important for spawning and are very slow growing, don't kill them. You know?
Yeah,
you know, you want to keep one. The size over here is, I think, 43 centimeters.
Yeah,
and you can keep 2 per month, except for 3 months in the winter, where in the winter and spring, I think it's December, January, February, it's catch and release only. And you're not likely to be fishing for bass, or certainly not fly fishing for bass at that time of the year anyway.
I'm not a lover of fish, full stop, any fish, to be honest, but once a year it's more of a tradition thing, you know, a group of us get together and on the Corrib, for instance, so we all meet up for lunch on one of the islands, and then we'll have 2 or 3 maybe between us, maybe 6 of us, you know, and we'll just fry them up. And to be honest, I don't like the taste of them. To me, I don't know what it is. I don't see the attraction in them. And funny enough, going back to the bass, the only bass I've actually killed was the first one I caught, and we did a feature when I was working for the magazine down in West Wales, and there was a guide with us then, Vaughan Thomas. And so the feature was to try and catch and then get it to the pan within, you know, straight away. And this we did. And I had a nice fish, probably about 2.5, maybe, something like that. And we killed it and we cooked it. It was on a disposable barbecue. And so it was on the pan and in our belly within 20 minutes of catching it, you know, maybe half hour. And that was one of the most tasteless things I've ever tasted. And I thought, what is, you know, and bass is quite a delicacy, isn't it? It's quite expensive. And I had a friend then, a while after I was telling him, and he was a chef. And he said, I'm not surprised, he said, because really speaking, the majority of fish you catch in the sea should be eaten the following day, because then they got the flavour in them, you know. Something I didn't know. But I'm not in a rush to eat another one. Will you carry on fishing now until maybe September when you go back to the trout fishing, or will you just really...
No, I mean, bass fishing here will run into nearly November. So, you know, like I was saying earlier, like when you get into sort of May, then you're moving from the lakes and river into the bass, and that continues on. Then you might do a little bit of a day or two on the lake. I think I'm going to Corrib maybe next week or the week after for it, just up and down for a day. And then every year around the end of August, I go for 3 days. Always the week of my birthday. It's a bit of a treat for myself. I'll always go try and get up to Corrib for 3 days, and we're planning that. We were on to Tom, but I think the World Cup's on in Mask.
August, yeah.
This weekend, I think he's busy. He's probably boating for that, and lads are out practicing, I suppose. So we're hoping to get up maybe middle of next week or the week after, just for a day. It's changed too for me, you know, 4 or 5 days a week on the coast. You know what I mean? Getting up to the lake is a bit of a novelty again then for me. So
yeah,
September will be the busy time. And then October's a really good month for bass, and especially bigger fish. And then November. And what I find happens is the amount of fish you catch in a session goes way down.
Yeah.
To the extent in November that you could fish 2 or 3 sessions for no fish, but that one fish could be, a double figure fish.
Yeah.
There's no immediate shortage of big bass, in Southern Ireland, like Southeastern Ireland. There are plenty fish from 8 pound up. And there's a guy down around here that does that. That snorkeling with the spear gun.
Right.
And he couldn't do it for 2 years because the rules were catch and release, and obviously you can't catch and release with the spear gun, right? But I remember one day I was driving down and I was going down fishing on a mark, and I went off fishing a bit, and I was coming back, and he arrived back. He'd come along in the meantime. He was parked there, so when he was coming back to his car at the same time, and he was walking along with this bass, and he had it caught by his waist, and the tail was dragging along the ground.
Wow!
So this is a big fish. And I said to him, "Oh, you got one." I said, "There's no point fighting or arguing. That's what he's doing. It's legal. Just because I'm into fly fishing or whatever, and I want to be killing big fish. And I was asking him a bit about it, and he said, bigger ones are a bigger target for him. Smaller ones are a lot harder for him to shoot." He said,
Quite.
which made sense when I thought about it. And he said to me, "Did you catch any?" And I said, "I had 1 or 2 small ones." "I'm not surprised," he said. "There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them along there." And I just looked at him and I said, "What do you mean?" So when I was snorkeling over there, he said, "There was loads of them." He said, "They're everywhere." And I hadn't caught any of my fish where he saw the fish. So, those guys, they're in the water with the fish. They're a good source of information.
Yeah.
If they'll tell you, where there's fish. And like he showed me pictures on his phone, and the size. I'm sure some of the bass were 12 and 13 pounds.
Have you had a double yourself?
Yeah. I know I've had a good few doubles. More on the lure when I was spinning at the start. I suppose it's a bit easier to catch on that. But I had a few on the fly. The biggest I had was 12 and a half.
Oh, lovely.
But you measure them, and there's a conversion thing online that will tell you the rough weight. And I went through one year. I remember I was sending off scales, and I had a couple of sort of 9 pound plus, fish. They can weigh heavier different times of the year. I expect too, if you were weighing them, but they've been better condition. But no, I've had a few, and I've had a couple on the fly, which is good. And if you were lure fishing around here and you're putting in a lot of time, I think anywhere from like 5 or 6 fish up, over 10 pounds would be achievable in a season for most lads to be putting in time.
Yeah.
And certainly, I know because other local lads around here, obviously they're on social media, and I see their catches and stuff. And, certainly fish kind of over 70 centimetres. So, kind of 7-8 pounds. Plenty of them caught, particularly with the lower lads. But it's still early enough in the season for us. And a lot of lads I'm guiding, I'm not fishing a lot of the time because I'm guiding, and a lot of the lads wouldn't be that experienced. So we've had a good few fish over 60 centimetres, which is, in the 6 pound bracket.
Yeah.
So that's encouraging,
Have you got any goals for this season?
After COVID and we were restricted and I could fish, I was lucky. I mean, even within 5 kilometres, I could bass fish.
Yeah.
There's certain locations in the estuary up the river channels and that would have been, I could fish, and certainly when it was 10 kilometres. But I know, it's funny for me, it's the company. Like a day out with yourself now in September, I'd be looking forward to that for the crack, like.
Yeah, it'd be good.
Or the day, the days on Corrib, myself and Dave and Tom. I mean, geez, how he doesn't throw one of us out of the boat, I don't know, because there'd be serious slagging going on,
Yeah.
And that's what it's about, It's catching fish is obviously a goal, and that's why I say for me, it doesn't matter what I'm fishing for. It's the day out and it's the fun, and like the guiding. To be honest, if you got all awkward lads, you probably wouldn't stay doing it. And I have a lot of sympathy for people who, are so reliant on it, like the guides up in Corrib and some of the salmon guides that they have to guide whoever. I don't. I'm in a lucky position. I teach full time, and then I guide the rest of the time. Yeah. So if I don't want to bring a lad out, I won't bring him. I don't. I'm not in a position where I have to take him.
Yeah. Well, you got to have your own time to fish as well, especially if you're working. You want to fish yourself.
Yeah. Look, I try and do a couple of days a week, get a day's fishing in myself or a day's shooting. I like to do a bit of shooting too, and come October when the bass fishing ends, then you're into pheasant season starting then in November and keep you going through the winter and you get a few feathers. Right. Few feathers for tying flies out of that. And,
you were saying about the company you enjoy. When I'm fly fishing, I just love company. It's nothing better. It's just to have a chat and you do things together. You go on the island, have some lunch or whatever. But when it comes to trolling, I have got to be on my own. I don't want to share the rods. They're my rods, and then But after saying that, I do enjoy now guiding. I've started taking people out. I got bookings already for September. While I take guests out to try and get them to catch a ferox, just for ferox fishing. This is not for trolling. And you meet some great people from totally different backgrounds of life, I was with a guy last May, and he was over the moon. I got him to get 2 ferox. One was 11 and the other one was 13, if I remember right. And he was over the moon. So I wanted to take some pictures, and I got these photographs of him with the fish. He said, do us a favour. He said, don't put him on social media, he said. I said, yeah, no worries. Why is that then? He said, I'm supposed to be in work.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we get a bit of that. It's funny, it'd be the same for me if I'm targeting big bass. It's time consuming and you really have to have the patience that you might blank. I'd imagine you could go trolling for ferox at times and it could be 2-3 days for one.
Oh yeah.
10 minutes of
and the rest
of activity, Yeah. And it's the same with big bass. If you get conditions, it's easy to say, but it's hard to sit there for hours, in a boat, or if you're bass fishing on the rocks or on the estuary, casting and casting and casting. You need a certain mentality to a lot of the lads that come to you to guide, even if you say, look, if you're coming in November, there's going to be a lot of time when you're not catching and you might catch, your biggest fish ever. I had a guy a couple of years ago came, he was a lower fishing guy, came in November, it was getting late in the season, he was fishing for 2 days, so we got 4 sessions in, between kind of outgoing tide, incoming tide. And on the 3rd session, he had his first fish. So a day and a half. Now, that was his PB bass. I think it was about 9 pound fish. Right. I remember trying to video him releasing it, but the light was bad I got it, but it didn't look that nice because it was real glare.
Yeah.
A glare in the water that day. But he caught mackerel and coalfish and other things, while he was waiting. But I could see, his idea of bass fishing was the schoolies. And, catching 5 or 6 or more fish in a session. Yeah. And that's not what it can happen, but mostly you're in November, you're going for big fish and you're going to have a lot of time where you're not catching, but you may well catch, late October, November. That's your double figure fish. I would have more double figure fish. Probably 90% of my double figure fish are caught October, November.
It's a mind game. It's definitely a mind game, a lot of it. Getting big fish in whatever species, I guess, And I've found when I used to start off going to the Corrib for the ferox, it would, like I said, you'd fish for a day or so, nothing, and then you'd have a nice fish, 7 pound, 8 pound, whatever. And it would make a day then. But then over the years then, I wanted bigger and bigger. And I've learned that there's different techniques, different mounts, different size bait for the bigger fish. And then, so I didn't want to catch these smaller fish then, these 7-8 pound fish. And I catch like a big fish, like a high teen. There's a certain method which I've got where I can go all week, 10 days without having a hit. And you start to crack, you think, shall I go back to just fishing for one or two of the smaller ones just to break it up? And I thought, no, I'm going to keep at it. And it's a mental thing, it really is. And then when that rod goes round, then you know you're going to got something great on, you know. But it doesn't help when you go into the bar at the end of the night and then they say, any fish today? And I say, no. And then they'll have 2 or 3, maybe, like, you know, on the fly. And you keep saying no. But I thought, one of these days, I can walk into this bar and I'll have something to remember. But it's definitely a mind thing. And I find it takes me 3 days to get my head into the zone. When I go to the Corrib, I will be there for 3 days before I feel relaxed. And know then, I don't mind not catching. Knowing then, you know, you're fishing the right way, the right bait, the right mounts, the right areas. So, but it's something which grips you. A lot of people will try it and they get fed up. You know, if they can't have it in a day, you know, they're not going to do it.
Big bass are the same with lures and flies. You know, you have to be willing to put up with. You know, even I remember in the early days with the lures, with the soft plastics, we used to fish these Senko worms. And if you fished one 4 or 5 inches long, you could catch schoolies away. But once you went 6, 7 inches, you started catching less and less and less of the smaller fish. But you're still getting the bigger fish.
Yeah.
You know? I remember I went through one year in October where I didn't fish any lure less than 7 inches long. I specifically got ones 8 inches to fish. Wasn't catching a lot of fish, but the fish I was getting were big fish.
Yeah.
You know, you think these big bass, you know, are feeding on joey mackerel that time of year. Do you know?
Yeah.
You know, your flies and your lures, they have to represent it. I'm convinced they are feeding on smaller stuff earlier in the year because most of the food items start off small and they grow bigger as the year goes on. A bit like probably the coarse fish that the ferox feed on. You know, they start small and they get bigger.
Yeah.
But I think what happens a lot of the time is the smaller fish are on it.
Yeah.
They'll have it caught before the big fish.
Yeah.
You know, they'll have it nabbed. You know, so I'd say it's probably the same trolling. In the early season, trolling with a small couple of inches long thing, sure, all the fish will eat something that size. So you're hoping that the big fella out of all those is going to grab it. So it's not like I think I was on Corrib when you caught that big fish. I think I was there that week.
Oh, were you?
And another lad, Shane, but we were staying across the road. You were in Burks, I'd say.
That's right. You were in Eddie's, were
you? We were across the road. And we might have been staying with Roy Pierce or someone, but we were across the road. And we had seen you out trolling.
Did you?
I remember saying to Shane, look at that fucking idiot, lunatic, trolling around all day for days, hoping to catch something, you know, and we're here catching. And you know, it's a funny logic, you know. There's some fella probably saying, look at that Egypt with his fly rod in November, you know, trying to catch a fish.
Yeah.
But I think we were there that week. There was a big commotion we heard in the bar across the road about this fella with the big fish. And we went across, if I remember rightly, and I think there was a crowd of people around you maybe. Every night, I'd say, for a couple of nights.
Yeah.
And we were saying, which fella is it? And there was the fella with the pint of Guinness with no hands on the glass.
No hands on the glass?
Drinking the pint of Guinness without holding the glass in his hands or something.
Oh, I didn't do that. No, that wouldn't have been me.
Wasn't it? You wouldn't do a thing like that.
No.
I do a straw.
No, but that actual day was something. Because after I caught the fish, I was out on the lake and it was a big wind. It was a big north wind this one day. And anyway, I played it for about an hour and a quarter it was. I hooked it at 2 o'clock and landed it at 3:15. And then when it was in the net, I was mentally drained, as exhausted as well as physical. So then I got on the phone because there's no one else out, and there was one of the boys then, Paul Garrity. He was a friend of mine, and he was about 4 mile down the lake. So I phoned him and I just said, I got a 20. Oh, I'll be there now, he said. So I just motored round into Lord's Bay, which is a bit sheltered at the time, not far from Roy Pierce's actually. And then it was nice and calm there. He came along and he could say, Jesus, that's the record. And I knew it was. And so little did I know then, we motored in, I went in, and he went in on his boat, and he made a phone call to Burke's that we were coming in. We got a great fish. So I didn't know this, so I was just travelling in my car now, right? And all of a sudden, as we come down into the village now, right, there must have been about 150 plus people in the street. It was like a royal visit. The jungle drums had gone out then, you know. And I thought,
what month was it, Gary?
What month?
Yeah.
Oh, May. May the...
Yeah, we were there. Yeah, it was May. That's what I was thinking.
Last week of May.
There. It was May.
Yeah. Because that's the thing, see, a lot of people think, why would I want to be fishing trolling when there's great mayfly fishing around then, you know? But I used to find that the end of May coming into June is peak time myself. There's less boats on. Most of the people who fish the mayfly are like first, second, going into the third week, and then it's a little bit quieter then. And I do like that. And into June even. So,
and you get a lot of calm mornings too.
You do. And another thing as well, I remember, like if I'm out trolling, I just got my trolling gear, not a fly rod with me. If I'm fly fishing, I got my fly rod. It's neither. I never have them both. But I remember a couple of the mornings I would go out early. I'd be there 4 or 5 o'clock some mornings. And then you could be out in the lake, right? And it's alive with fish rising. Unbelievable. And I would never fly rod with me. And then sometimes then, sort of like 8 o'clock, in the distance, you'll hear some boats coming out, ready to fish. And it's as if the fish are switched on, right? As soon as you hear that engine, that boat come out, slowly you see them stop. You know, they don't rise. They are so fine-tuned, these fish over there, like, you know.
Oh, no, they know when I'm coming anyway. They definitely switch off.
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll do a deal. You take me bass fishing when I'm over next month or September, and I'll take you for a day on the lake, on the Corrib.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that some summer, I think, on the lake. But yeah, no, come down and we'll do a bit of bass, and we might get out on the lake as well.
I'd love to do that. Yeah, I
think whatever the conditions suit. If the weather is good and calm and sunny, we'll do the bass, and if it's
sounds good.
not good for the bass, we'll go down to the lake.
Well, it's been nice catching up again and having a chat. Is that time now? I got one more question to ask you. Where would you want to be to make your last cast?
Make your last cast. Look, I'll tell you where, but before we would put in a proviso, I think we're going to have to change this question, Ceri, to who would you want to be fishing with when you make your last cast? This one now for going forward, yeah? Because for me, it's the company, you know. So with that in mind, you know, if I was on my own, I'd definitely be November on a certain spot on the Copper Coast with my fly rod, trying to get that bigger bass, you know, the 13 pounder. I know there's definitely one out there. But, you know, other than that, it would be probably out in the likes of Corrib or Mask with Dave and Tom, or it wouldn't matter. It could be up to Blackwater with my buddy Morris. You know, it's the day out, the fun, as you said, in on the island for a bit of food. It's all about the people you meet and the company and a bit of fun. You'll remember.
I could talk for ages now, and I've thoroughly enjoyed our chat again. It's been a long time, and hopefully,
looking forward to September.
Yeah, definitely. We'll keep in touch now, and I hope you'll have some success now until then, and we'll catch up in September.
No problem. Thanks, Ceri.
Many thanks, Jason. Take care now.
Bye.
If you've enjoyed this podcast and want to listen to more, please consider becoming a Patreon, where you will get over 90 past episodes and weekly podcasts, plus photography and exclusive content. To join, visit patreon.com/casting with Ceri Jones. or see the link on my website, castingwithkerryjones.com. Well, that's all for now. Tight lines and don't strike too soon.